So right now is a time where we are all staying at home, practicing social distancing, trying our best to learn and teach and just do our work from our houses. But I figured, why not bring a little bit of the world into your homes? In grade 9, we're learning about a new unit called biological diversity, and a lot of the concepts from this can be taught if we talk about a place that's been really special to me, a place that I want to go to even more than space, the Galapagos Islands. The Galapagos Islands are a series of 13 islands just off the coast of Ecuador. So if we have our equator, Ecuador, just off of South America, and then there's this series of about 13 islands. The cool thing about these islands is that pirates used to seek refuge there, and so did whalers. I guess I've read that whalers like to take the giant tortoises because a giant tortoise can survive a really long time without eating, even without drinking water, and so they would take them, bring them onto their ships, and then they would live there until it was time to kill them and eat them, and that would be their food source because they would be at sea for so long. Another ship came to the Galapagos after all these pirate ships called the HMS Beagle, and on that ship was a very famous scientist, Charles Darwin. He's known as the father of evolution. And when he arrived, he noticed that every single island was a little bit different. One was a little bit more tropical, or like a rainforest. One was dry, like a desert. One was a little bit more like our plains with the grasses and stuff. And then he looked at the animals. Well, not all the animals were the same. There were some that could go across different islands, but there were some animals that maybe like birds that were all really similar, but because they were on different islands and they were separated, and because they had different food sources, and because they had different climates that created those food sources, what if they had a common ancestor? What if they evolved, that they changed from one generation to the next? And so boom, evolution. It's a little more complicated to that, and we'll definitely get into it as we're learning more about natural selection, artificial selection, and all the cool concepts that we'll cover throughout this term or this unit. I'm going to tell you guys about some of my favorite animals that live in the Galapagos. And a lot of these animals don't live anywhere else in the world because it is an island right along the equator, so it's nice and it's warm, and they were able to evolve in this area where there really aren't very many predators. And so when we look at the diversity of the Galapagos Islands, we can see these animals that just don't exist anywhere else. I mentioned the Galapagos tortoise. The cool thing about the Galapagos tortoise is that they can live to be really, really old, about 100 years in the wild. Now there's one, Harriet, at the Australia Zoo, who lived to be about 175 years old. And so Steve Irwin and his family took care of Harriet and other Galapagos tortoises. Iguanas are a pretty popular species in the Galapagos. There's a land iguana, and they're these like armored, awesome dudes that just like walk up to a cactus with all the little needles and nom 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 nom, eat a cactus. I don't know about many animals that can just eat a cactus, but they can. Now, if you thought that was cool, even cooler are marine iguanas. The Galapagos Island is the home to the only marine iguana species in the entire world. What is a marine iguana? Well, it's these little guys that have adapted these big long claws that can brace onto rocks, and they can get hit by waves and waves and waves and still be able to hang on and eat seaweed and different algae and stuff. They've got this big fat tail that most lizards have to help them swim in the water, and they've evolved to be able to secrete all the salt through these glands, and they eat seaweed, which is just unheard of in the iguana world. I think if I went to the Galapagos Islands, one of the things I would really want to do, other than see the iguanas, is go scuba diving. They have amazing coral reefs and fish species, and just unbelievable. Like, look how beautiful that is. It's amazing. One of the things that you'd see when you scuba dive are the fur seals. The Galapagos fur seals have evolved to be incredibly playful, and when you go there, they tell you you can't touch any animals. You can't go near the animals, you can't bug the animals. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This is like a sanctuary. Thou shalt not touch the animals. But the animals don't have natural predators, and so these fur seals will often come up to divers and swim all around them, and you'll just be these happy little playful sea puppies, which who doesn't want to play with a sea puppy? Now, another species that only lives in the Galapagos Islands are the Galapagos penguins, and they're just little guys. And one thing that drives me crazy as a science teacher is when I see any pictures, or especially around Christmas holiday wrapping paper, that has penguins with polar bears. Penguins and polar bears don't live together. Polar bears live in the Arctic, penguins in the Antarctic. And penguins in nature will venture further north, but the furthest north they exist are in the Galapagos Islands. Another really cool bird of the Galapagos is the albatross. Albatross are pretty famous birds because they have this massive wingspan. And because their wingspan is so long, they can float and soar on wind currents for hours, days maybe. I actually don't know. I'll look that up. Another bird, much like the penguin, that's also flightless is the flightless cormorant. And you look at these birds and you're like, oh, they've got some ugly wings. It's because they don't fly. They use these wings to help them, much like a penguin, swim through the water. And so they'll dive off rocks and swoosh around, and then they'll grab fish in the water and pop back out. So they don't really need their wings because they don't fly. Another really cool bird, and my second favorite bird, and say it with me, is the frigate bird. Frigate bird. The frigate bird is this really cool looking bird, and he comes along, and all of a sudden, the male will spot a female, like, oh, hey, how's it going? And he'll inflate, almost like a frog, this big throat of his, and it'll get big and red, and he'll be like, hey baby, you like my big red engulfed throat? Yeah, it's pretty nice, hey? You want to mate? Because then your babies will look like me. It's pretty nice, hey? Now another bird, my favorite Galapagos bird, that does a mating display is the blue-footed booby. Yeah, I said booby. The blue-footed booby is really cool because they have these bright, beautiful blue feet. And so when the male sees a female, he'll be like, hey, you know why you should come hang out with me? Look at my blue feet. And they'll do this little dance of like, look at my feet. Oh, they're so nice. Look at my pretty blue feet. I realize I'm waving my hands around, but you can't see my feet right now. So these birds, they'll show off their feet, and then the females will be like, damn girl, did you see them blue feet? That's the kind of feet I want my babies to have. So that's one of the reproductive pressures going on here, is that competition between who's got the bluest feet. Boobies do. So you cannot talk about the Galapagos Islands without talking about the most famous bird there. Although it doesn't look as impressive as a frigate bird or a blue-footed booby, these are called finches, and they're known as Darwinsfinches. So when Charles Darwin was making his observations of all the different islands of the Galapagos, he noticed, like I said before, that every island is a little bit different, and that every island had finches on it, but they were all a little bit different. And he thought, I wonder what's going on here. And so if he looked at a bird that lived on a certain island that had a lot of insects, let's say, and that bird happened to have a long pointy nose. Long pointy nose insects, that makes sense. And then on another island, maybe where they had big trees with all kinds of fruit, and that bird had a different shape that works really well for eating fruit. What about those ones over there? They've got these big thick beaks for like crushing seeds or nuts or things. And then he thought, what if all of them had a common ancestor? And that because maybe at one time they were all on one island and spread to other islands, and as they spread and they moved and passed on their genes and reproduced generation after generation after generation, a bird that maybe started off one way, when it's at a different island with a different pressure and a different food source, eventually, slowly, over many, many, many generations, evolved and changed. Now, there's a lot more to it than that, and we're going to get into it later, but it's just really cool to think that this amazing idea came from observing the world around you and from going to this super cool place. So, when you guys are older and all of this COVID nonsense is done and we can all travel the world again, this is definitely a place to visit. Not only does it have beautiful animals and wildlife and nature, but it's also somewhere that you can go, and you just have to be smart about when you travel there, because you don't want to be those people that are promoting exploiting the animals. You want to be able to go to places that are eco-friendly, that do not let you touch the animals, and places that are promoting local wildlife and sustainability initiatives. The biggest problem that the Galapagos Islands is facing right now isn't necessarily climate change and the stresses that causes, although that is pretty big. but it's actually invasive species. So when people come from other places in the world and they bring with them, let's say they have dandelion seeds in their clothing or on their shoes, and then that would become a weed and that would take over and choke out the existing species. Or maybe like domestic animals and cows and pigs and chickens, or maybe things like rats that stow away. And those animals actually take away the habitat and the food sources of the naturally occurring endemic species. And just make sure that you are, when you go there, that you write me about it and be like, hey, Mme Green, I'm in the Galapagos, look how awesome this is. And yeah, I look forward to us sharing our adventures around the world and looking at different species and different animals and all the different things that the world has to bring while we're at home.